It looks like you guys were a little bit more behind than I was expecting, which is fine. We're just going to catch up on a couple. Most importantly, these ones are not as common on the AP exam, so I'm not too worried that we're going to go really quick on them. So my understanding is we stopped or talked about this one. HOLC? Okay. All right. So all I would know for this one is government-bought mortgages. So basically, as the economy was collapsing around you and different things like that, the government decided to buy everybody's mortgages, and they restructured the loans so not everybody loses their homes. So if you notice in this picture, you can see that you have the farmer, you have the mortgage relief right here. He's like, please just shoot this mortgage relief and get it off of me to be able to help out the average homeowner. Now the FHA, if you will basically put next to this, helps people buy a house. So if you think about when the housing market crashed back in 2008, we are on our Great Depression notes. So if you think about the housing market when it collapsed before, people couldn't buy a house and it made it even worse. So basically they made it easier to buy a house, which is what this one is going to be for. So if you notice, we switched from having no homeowners to lots of homeowners. However, this has changed because millennials are not buying houses anymore. And so now this number is, I think, about 50-50 of homeowners versus non-homeowners. The NRA, what I would know about this one is this one's going to be those, I would just put labor. This helps out labor in many different ways, such as setting minimum wages, outlawing child labor, guaranteeing your union rights, but if you will put next to this, unconstitutional. This is, and we'll talk about that later, but this leads to parts of the New Deal being found as unconstitutional. The Wagner Act, I would start the Wagner Act because for some reason they love it. I think it's kind of boring, but they love it. And all you need to really know is union rights. So even in this whole depression, you still have to give people rights and things like that. So they're going to grant them union-based rights. So the CCC. Now this one is a double-starred. It is the most common one that you will see on the exam. And in my opinion, it's my favorite one. So as you guys know, this appealed to what demographic? Young men, in particular between 18 and 24. Remember that hobo activity that we did? This is going to solve that hobo problem. And so it was very, very strict. You lived in a military environment. You lived in military barracks. You were up at 6 a.m. You were not allowed to drink. You were not allowed to smoke. It was very specific, or you get kicked out. Why would people follow all these really strict rules? They needed a job, right? They needed money, job, and they're willing to do what they can to do it. Anybody remember how much money they made per month? $30. Okay, and anybody remember how much they have to send home? 25. Okay, that's like a basic fact, by the way, about the CCC. It's a great thing to throw in there. It's like the fact everybody knows. Why would they send money back home? Because it stimulates their home economy, right? So not only are you stimulating this economy, but another. Now, many of you guys actually have a lot of effects from the CCC. A lot of this, and if you want to put next to this one, Forestry Service, that's who runs this, is it's all going to be forestry. So, for example, who's ever been to Yellowstone? Everybody been to Yellowstone? So those buildings, about 80% of those buildings were built by the CCC. So this is the very first main entrance to Yellowstone. It's called the Norris entrance. And almost all of you, since you go through West Yellowstone, probably have been here. It was built by the CCC. If you travel up near Brigham City, you'll see these steps in the mountains. Those were created to prevent rock slides. Anybody know where this is? This is Strawberry Dam, about an hour and a half away from here. Strawberry was created by the CCC. Now, the WPA is also a double-starred one, but this is going to be the unemployable. So the people who are hard to employ are going to be the ones that benefit from this. So, for example, in an economic emergency, are you more or less likely to go to a theme park?
Significantly less.
Significantly less. You don't have any money. That's why if your parents took you to Disney World between like 2008, 2012, that's because they had all these deals to try to get people to go to the parks. It was like buy one, get one. And the hotel rooms were like $80 because they were trying to get people to go. What about, are you more or less likely to go to the opera? Less. You don't have any money for it. So what if the government pays you to have a job when you're unemployable? So they, in particular, did artists, musicians, actors, and writers. And a lot of it was also hard labor work. So, for example, where is this in Utah? We really need to start going on some field trips, I think, once the ban is over, since we can't go on field trips. Strawberry fishery, strawberry hatchery. It's where all the salmon are created in Utah. Oh, now you know. How about this place? It's in Salt Lake City Valley. That's right, it's Draper High School. Good job, everybody. Draper High School. Okay, this is one that I'm sure many of you have actually already been to.
Oh, that's that one house.
Nope.
It's not.
This is Alta Ski Resort. This is Watson Lodge. Okay? Yep. So if you actually look, so if they were to take away all the drywall, it's been renovated at this point, but if they take out all the drywall, you would see the original brick. I had a student last weekend that actually went to Alta and took a picture in this doorway. With it all fancy and renovated. It doesn't look like this anymore. Okay. Also, artists started to create art pieces that were specific to the Great Depression. If you're in AP Art, I'm sure you've seen American Gothic, one of the most famous pictures. And then also, this picture is one of the most famous ones. It's been parodied many, many, many different times. But they also started paying for entertainment. Maybe you should still be happy even in an economic crash. So what they did is they paid people to give free concerts all around the United States. Now, the SSA is, again, so by the way, I forgot to mention something. The CCC, you can actually still join in Utah, by the way. So if you're between 16 and 18 years old, the CCC is hiring right now for you to work in the summer. You work for 6 weeks up in the forestry service, and you get paid $2,800. Plus, I think it's $2,000 to a state college as a scholarship. So I've had a lot of students do that, but it is nature. And I've heard a lot of Skyline students don't like nature and don't like to go into mountains. Go there. Because I've heard a lot of people have never been to the Uintas. Go. Be free. Okay? Now, the SSA, though, is probably one of the biggest impacts on you guys today, specifically because in the 1960s it gets heavily expanded. So you need to know that it helps 3 people: the elderly, the unemployed, and the disabled. So you guys pay with each of your security or each of your paychecks to Social Security. All of you have a Social Security card. Memorize it as soon as possible. Also, don't laminate it. That makes it, makes, what's the word? Not usable. Invalid. Thank you for that word. But it basically says that you can't use it anymore if you do that. Now, when you get your paycheck, you will see this fancy little thing in here that says FICA. You want to care right now about this one. Medicare comes in 1964, and then Social Security is going to be the one right now. So why would you get Social Security? So first off, if you're unemployed for more than 3 months, you receive an unemployment check from the government that allows you to sustain your family. It has been very controversial with the unemployed. Certain states require that you have to prove that you're trying to find a job, different things like that. But regardless, though, you do get an unemployment check. The second group of people are going to be the elderly. So in theory, when all of us turn 65, we will get paid a monthly stipend from the government, usually between $1,200 and $1,500 a month, to be able to get you by. Is Social Security going to go bankrupt by the year 2033?
Yes.
Yes. But in theory, all of us will pay into it, and we will all get it back when we are older.
Right.
That's the goal. I don't know. They would have to expand it to, I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. I'm going to wait till 2033 and find out. But I'm literally not banking on having Social Security when I'm older. And then the last one is for the disabled. So a lot of people don't realize this, but if you have a family member that is disabled, such as Down syndrome, severe autism, something like that, they have to meet qualifications. Or let's say, for example, you're an adult and you get into an accident at work and you can never work again. You receive a paycheck every month for your family. That's part of the reason why people with Down syndrome, they get a little bit of help so that they can be able to stay at home. They don't have to work, so that they can be able to care for whoever is the disabled person. Okay? The TVA, by the way, they love the TVA for some reason. So I don't know. It's the TVA. What you need to know is dam. They build dams for electricity, and that's what you need to know. The TVA basically paid a whole bunch of people to create this massive dam system. It still continues today to provide electricity for Tennessee. However, they have not massively improved this. So I would still put it in the recovery, because it gives immediate recovery relief, because now it's cheaper to have electricity and stuff like that, but they do still rely on the dams today in Tennessee. Anybody know what the other dam is that they created during the Great Depression? Through the WPA? Hoover Dam. Hoover Dam was created during the WPA. And then, let's see. This is what the dam looks like today. Okay. AAA is one of my favorites, so I would star it, because it's the reason why, if you want to put next to this, no more Dust Bowl. So, remember with the Dust Bowl, how we over-farmed and it led to this natural disaster? So the soil erosion and stuff like that, we overfarmed. So the AAA pays you not to farm. Let me explain how that works. So this is if you want to put next to the AAA, crop rotation. So let's pretend that this is my block of farming. Every farmer is split up into 4 equal parts that is over a certain amount of threshold. So if you create so much, you have to do this. Your farm is then split into 4 equal parts. Year 1, I grow here, and I get paid for this one, and this one, even though there's no crops by the government. Next year, I switch to here, don't grow here, and I get 3 plots of land paid for by my government. It's called crop rotation. The benefit of this is it doesn't destroy the soil, and it encourages farmers to rotate crops because then they still get paid by the government. Now, do they get less than they would probably get at market value? Yes, but it does protect the soil. Does that make sense? So again, prevents the Dust Bowl from being able to occur. Okay, Indian New Deal, if you see this, they did reorganize. So I would just know that they reorganized Indian policy, tribal lands. So if you see it, you should be able to get by with it, no problems. This is going back to, I think, your second page. Fireside Chats, if you want to put emotionally got America back to where it needed to be. Basically, every week he would go in front of the American people and say, here's what we're doing to fix this. Obama did something very similar when he was the president. And it was called Fireside Chats because he would always do this next to the fire at his house. That's why it's called a fireside chat.
The White House is a fire pit?
There's a fireplace. And if you go on a tour of the White House, you walk by the room and it's always open that you can see the room where he did all of his fireside chats. It's a part of the tour.
What did you say about the Indian New Deal?
As long as you know that it reorganized tribal policy. They hardly ever talk about it, but if they do, there you go. But the most important, it's 2 key concepts, is I would also know opponents of the New Deal. So if you want to bracket through the Supreme Court and then start, because the next one says the Supreme Court, and know it. So here's the reason why, and this happens anytime a president tries to do this. I would say that FDR is more leaning central compared to Bernie Sanders, but a lot of what he did would if he was around today, everyone would call him a socialist, I think, in my opinion. And that was the fear. Is FDR very socialist? And so people started to disagree. So you can see also, what about the money spent? If you want to put next to opponents the word deficit spending. Deficit spending. So deficit spending is basically where you know that you are going into debt. So you go into debt to be able to spend more money. Prior to this, we had the gold standard. After this, we have always been in debt. Okay? So if you notice right here, ring around a Roosevelt, pockets full of dough. Okay? That's what we're talking about. He's just spending. And so FDR versus the Supreme Court is what's important. So the NRA gets sued. Is it constitutional or not? And what happens is the Supreme Court must decide if the New Deal is constitutional. Now, previously, a few laws had been found unconstitutional. The Supreme Court was not happy with the New Deal. So FDR has a great idea. This is what he says. When you turn 60 years old, you're kind of old. You have been around for a long time, and while, yes, you're allowed to be in the Supreme Court for life, you're not probably going to make the best decision. So I have a great idea. For every person over 60, out of the 9-person Supreme Court, I'm going to add a new person in. That will allow a younger viewpoint on the same issue. And it adds in more judges than oppose the New Deal. Why would he do that?
So it can get it passed.
So it can get passed. And the young people are going to pass his laws. Was this constitutional? No way. And if this happened today, it would be impeachable. So he tries to put in this. It gets stopped by the Congress. Again, was FDR a constitutional president? I would probably say no. I think a lot of what he did would not be supported today. However, it's the lesser of two evils. You either accept the New Deal or you dive further into the Great Depression. Does that make sense? So it's like, yeah, that sucks, but I got a job, and that's all that matters. Make sense? So in terms of overall effects of the Great Depression, make sure you do not ever put the New Deal ended the Great Depression. World War II ended the Great Depression. Okay? However, if you want to make sure to put next to that, it recovered the Great Depression. So while it did not pull it out, it did help recover the Great Depression. And then everything else we're pretty good for. Let's go ahead and let's head into World War II. So switch pages, go into World War II, please.
notes when I came in. Oh, wait, they're over here.
There's 4 papers. See all 4?
Yeah.
All right. Now, World War II has not been a DBQ on the regular operational exam for a while. It was the DBQ a few years ago on the international exam. However, I think it would be a fantastic DBQ and you guys would kill it, okay? However, what I can tell you is there's going to be at least 3 to 4 stimulus sets specifically on World War II. So make sure that you know it. Now, you guys all did your homework, correct?
Yeah.
For my class that doesn't do the most homework out of all my classes, you guys all did it?
Yeah.
All right, I'm glad for the 5 people who said it. Good job. So this is what you need to know. And if you want to take a picture of this and write it down later so it's a little bit quicker, it's kind of up to you. This is everything that you need to know from that homework assignment. So again, everything that you need to know from your homework assignment is up on the board. It's a lot to write down, which is why I would take a picture of it and reference it when you're studying for your exam. Now, on your packet that you picked up today, Duck Notes is this information. So everything you learned is on Duck Notes, front and back page. Okay? Everybody got that? Now, I'm going to quickly go over a couple of these viewpoints really quickly. Very, very important. You need to know the movement from isolationism to interventionism. You guys know that last page that you guys had to look up the definitions of and stuff like that? Did you guys remember that? That is what I would know. You need to be able to correctly identify how did America move as a causation essay towards interventionism. You need to know totalitarianism, which I'll talk about in a second, overall causes, starts of the war. Make sure that you know the war begins with the invasion of Poland in 1939, but America comes in at Pearl Harbor. Okay? Allied versus Axis powers. Please don't be that person who puts that Germany and America were allies. I've seen it every year on essays, and it makes you look really not smart. Nope, not stupid, just not smart. Okay? And then America's movement towards war. These are all the terms, and then causes for Pearl Harbor. So I'm going to quickly go over a couple of them. Stalin. Now, I am never, ever, ever going to say that Hitler was not Hitler wasn't a bad person. But when you look at Hitler, who killed anywhere between 16 million and 30 million people, Stalin is about several times worse. So Stalin believed in this idea of, so basically Lenin is the president, or not the president, Lenin is the dictator in communist Russia, and everybody loved him. Well, the problem is that after Lenin dies, 2 of his major political advisors, which were going to be Trotsky and Stalin, the 2 of them are bitter rivals. And Lenin, if you read his journals, he's like, we're all best friends. Stalin and Trotsky love each other. No, they hated each other. And the minute Lenin dies, it is Stalin's goal to get rid of Trotsky. Now, all of these pictures are comparison pictures between what are in Russian textbooks and what are in American textbooks. So, I want to point out these pictures right here. So, you have Stalin right here, Lenin right here, and Trotsky. Trotsky disappears. Then you have Stalin and Trotsky. Trotsky disappears. Then over here, you have Lenin and Trotsky, and I know this one's hard to see. Trotsky's gone. Okay? Trotsky disappears from here to here. So, all of a sudden, Trotsky begins to disappear. And they literally rewrote history. If you read a Russian textbook now, it's actually against the law to smuggle textbooks out of the country. But if you read a textbook right now, Trotsky doesn't exist. He never existed, and he will never exist until another leadership comes into power. So what happens to Trotsky? Well, Trotsky obviously has a death wish, right? Trotsky's going to get killed. So he flees to Mexico. When he goes to Mexico, he's hanging out in his hotel room. An assassin runs in and then hits him in the head with an axe.
Oh, that was an
Ice pick. Okay? Then he survives. He gets to the hospital where he's then shot and killed by assassins. Now, hi, Maddie.
Hello.
Oh, thanks. Do I get to leave class?
Yeah,
The notes are never for me.
Yeah, they usually aren't.
Nick, you've been selected. So basically you can see Stalin's a pretty bad guy. Now, in the end, I want to show you this picture. This is the comparison between the amount of people killed between different dictators. Now, in my opinion, they're being very generous to Stalin. I think Stalin killed way more people than they're saying. Stalin's range is anywhere between 30 million and 110 million people. You might say, well, why is there such a range? Well, first off, how he killed people. Now, if he wanted to kill you and execute you, he actually had quotas. So when he was at the height of his power, he would give his police officers a quota for every city. And when they entered into that city, that's how many people they had to kill. And then additionally, a whole bunch of people died of famine. And so a lot of this is, think about all the areas that are basically bare land. A lot of people they're assuming are in mass graves. But this is how many actual bodies they have found. So this is an estimate. And you might say, by the way, who's this dude? That's Mao Zedong. Yeah. Probably the worst dictator in the world. And again, that's not saying Hitler wasn't bad. But he's responsible for an estimated 110 million that we know of people that he killed. And that was in 1960. Yeah. So Mao Zedong was the communist leader in China. And when he comes into power, he has this new belief called the Great Leap Forward, which means that they will great leap forward into an industrialized city and country. The issue is that when they decide to do this, they decide to pump all their money into the large industrial cities. But unfortunately, 70% of China is not in those cities. And so what happened is food went to the industrial cities. Money went to the cities. And people literally just died. Like people would walk over to their neighbor's house, walk in, and everybody is so emaciated that they're dead. Additionally, he wanted to get rid of anybody that didn't believe in him, in particular kids. And I know that at school we don't value our education as much in America as we probably should, considering the fact that in some countries people walk 10 to 12 miles to be able to get to school. But a lot of kids, the problem of why education is so fearful to a dictatorship is the more you learn, the more you start to say, why is it that the industrial cities get more money than us? Why is it that I don't have any food, but the industrial cities do? Because I don't have a picture of it. But if you look at the propaganda is that they have all this food when they don't. So what they decided to do is they decided to basically cull kids. And so they would bring these trucks to cities in the rural communities and say, we're going to bring you to a cool boarding school in Beijing. And then all the kids would get into the trucks, and then they would drive away, and they would never be found again. And they are just starting to find mass graves of kids that have been killed. A really sad story. This was actually by a church leader here in the Valley. And he was talking about how he was there when that happened. And he was in the truck, but they didn't have enough room in the truck, so they had the truck bed down. And they hit a pothole, and he fell out. And he ran for miles and this was like at 8 years old, trying to catch up to the truck. And he was disowned by his family for not valuing his education when he went home. But he was the only one of those kids that ever survived, because none of the kids came back. It's basically, in the Hunger Games, how they have the capital, but then everybody else suffers? That's why. It's literally that, but with Mao Zedong. That book's very political, by the way. There's a lot in there. Okay. Anyways, but it's not for A push, so we're not going to focus on it. Anyways, so this is, by the way, I just want to point out, more people died from Stalin than in all of World War I. So, a lot of people ended up dying. Now, in terms of Stalin altogether, okay, Stalin was not the best guy, okay? I thought you would enjoy this meme. It's one of those memes that you get it, but it also makes you feel uncomfortable inside. Yeah. Okay. Now, Mussolini, yes?
Didn't Stalin intentionally cut off Ukraine from getting food? Like, not just accidentally.
Well, Russia does a lot for you. I feel bad for Ukraine. But again, for example, when a Ukrainian plane was shot down by a missile, Russia said there was no way it could ever be them, even though there was irrefutable evidence that it was. So Russia and its satellite nations are very, very interesting. But yeah. Okay. Anyways, Mussolini, though, in my opinion, was a wannabe Hitler. And if you look at how horrible the leader was, especially in the war starts, he tried to emulate Hitler in every way possible. Now, he also believed in photoshopping to be able to make you think that he was greater than he was. So you can see right here, he's this great war hero riding a horse, but then it's actually being held by this lady, but it's photoshopped out. He won Life's Magazine's Person of the Year in 1933. This was his cover photo. He's never flown a plane before. And it was all about how he flies a plane. And then he also had this in that same Life magazine. He's never played the violin. But it was all about this way of showing. Now, Mussolini had a very strict hand. He said that you could set your watch by the train schedule because it was so on time. Unfortunately for him, when the war starts, the leadership does not reign. He dies in an extremely violent way. Awful, awful, terrible way. But he ends up being killed. And then Hitler commits suicide a week later. I wonder why. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So Then you have Hitler, and obviously you know that Hitler breeds from a horrible economic environment following World War I. So you can see, like we talked about before, money became worthless. So you're saying here, this would normally be about $5,000, but he's using it as like a building block and different things like that. Hitler was a fantastic orator. He convinced anybody of what he wanted. And then really the big reasons of why he becomes so powerful, he believed that Germany should be everything about anything. Everybody should be around German. It's extreme nationalism, to the point that today, Germans do not sing the national anthem. Germans do not fly the flag because of the fact that they don't want to be compared to this nationalism. Additionally, you have the Aryan race, blonde hair, blue eyes, trying to get the perfect race. And then the idea of Lebensraum, which basically stands for living space. There's not enough space in Germany, so we must expand our borders. Japan does the same thing. Over in Japan, if you want to put next to Japan, is the word militarism. So they don't have necessarily political belief, but they have militarism. It's about halfway down on the first page. And they massively expand their military and their spheres of influence. They start to do Lebensraum all around Asia. And they are also the start of the pre-World War II stuff. So if you want to put that the pre-World War II, like the start of concerns, is Japan's invasion into Manchuria, which happens in 1931. So in 1931, this starts really the invasion. Now, they invade into Manchuria. They say they don't have enough space in Japan, so they must invade. And then, of course, the League of Nations is going to come and save everything and stop them from doing this, correct? Yeah. But I thought they were really powerful and they were going to create peace. No, they send a letter to Japan that says, we need you to stop doing that. Japan doesn't respond. Okay? Not very successful. And then, obviously, as time goes on, we start to have some decisions. So the Neutrality Acts, right? We are neutral. We are isolationists. We don't care about Europe because we are not going to all die. That's the Neutrality Acts. But I love, so you'll see Dr. Seuss, and if you're a big Dr. Seuss fan, he's a political propagandist. Everything you've read is a lie. Not a lie, I should say, but it's all political propaganda to you. And we're going to learn that actually in about 2 weeks, about how a children's book that you read as a kid is all political propaganda to convince you of something. But we'll talk about that later. But he has an entire book. It's called Dr. Seuss Goes to War, and it has his 600 political cartoons. So if you notice, for example, so you can see it says, get your ostrich bonnet here, relieves the Hitler headache. Forget the terrible news you've read, your mind's at ease in an ostrich head. What is that implying?
Stick your head in the ground.
Yeah, you stick your head in the ground. It doesn't matter if somebody else is a problem. It's not ours. So, for example, we have the quarantine policy. So let's pretend that we have a zombie apocalypse here at Skyline. It does not affect anybody else, so do not worry about your family. But it does affect here at Skyline. And we here, through the door, Miss Carlisle's class is getting, like, eaten to shreds. Okay? Now, we could go and help them, right? It might sacrifice ourselves, but it would save the other people. Or what are we probably going to do? Shut the door, lock everything, and defend for ourselves. That's what we did with the quarantine policy. We said, that sucks for you guys, but as long as it stays in those countries, we'll all be just fine, right? Yeah, totally. Until Germany wants Sudetenland. Now, this Sudetenland, which it's somewhere on your paper, appeasement is somewhere, I think it's on the second page. I don't really remember where I put it. But you need to know that appeasement is going to be the major reason why Hitler believes that he can be able to progress. Bottom of first page. Okay, so let me explain what appeasement is. And you guys already did this on your assignment, but it's one of my favorite things to talk about. So with appeasement, Germany had lost all of this area following World War I. And so instead, they believed that there's a little country in Czechoslovakia. It's called Sudetenland. This had 90% Germans. And while it was Czechoslovakia, they believed that's our land. So they want to acquire it. And they let everybody know we are about to invade them. Well, England has a problem. How are we going to stop Hitler from invading all these countries? And in my opinion, that was a hypothetical question. In my opinion, this becomes one of the worst decisions in world history. They give Germany Sudetenland. They don't ask Sudetenland, and they don't ask Czechoslovakia. England gives them Sudetenland. And says in there that you can have Sudetenland as long as you never invade any countries ever again. Well, I want you to imagine when you are over 18, you have a stable job, you have a baby, okay? And you take it, and I am sure you have seen this in a store, and that baby sees that candy bar, that toy, And what do when they can't get it? They cry, they bang, they have meltdowns, they're like twisting their back in all different ways. They are freaking out. And as a parent, you get to the point where you're so embarrassed, they're screaming so hard that what do you eventually do to stop them from crying? You're going to give them the candy. And then you're like, okay, here's your candy. Now never cry again. What's going to happen in 5 minutes when they see that sugary cereal that they want? They're going to cry again, and what are you going to do to make them shut up? You're going to give them again. Do you see why appeasement sucks so badly? We're like, please don't do this anymore. Germany's super happy because they know that they've gotten away with it now, but it becomes an absolute disaster. So there's another Dr. Seuss cartoon for you. You can see if you give them one more lollipop, you'll all go away, right? Wrong. Okay? Now, obviously, Hitler's going to decide to invade into Poland. Okay? Now, when Hitler invades into Poland on September 1st of 1939, the UN sends a letter to Germany, and it says, if you do this, you're going to get in trouble. They invade into Poland, and they're like, well, guess we got to go to war, and they totally break the Treaty of Versailles. Yes?
Like the report too is they were breaking the Treaty of Versailles up to like 4 years prior.
No, because this is the time where you're now breaking the Treaty of Versailles. It's kind of like if your parents say you have to be home by 9, but then for the last 5 years you've been coming home at midnight, and they're like, but now it's a problem.
It's like,
Yeah, it was a total disaster.
It's like when parents count to 3, they go 2, 2.5.
Yeah, and they're like, yeah, okay, now 1. Yeah, I totally get that, okay? So obviously we begin to get pulled into war. The cash and carry policy in particular, so it's another Dr. Seuss cartoon, begins to pull Uncle Sam right into the war. And eventually at Pearl Harbor, which this was our own fault, we had 70% of our fleet docked at the same time in perfect order. A lot of them were filled with gasoline, but were not prepared to actually leave. And then it ends up becoming a massive bombing, and it declares war. You need to know why Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. And that is because we were fearful of losing the Philippines. We did an oil embargo, and it resulted in Japan being so angry that they ended up bombing us to make us stop, but instead we declared war. Well, yeah, it's Japan, and if you read what the commander of Pearl Harbor said, they told him afterwards, they said, you have had a great victory, sir, and this has stopped the giant. And then he actually responds and he says, it's something along the lines of, but I fear that we have actually awoken a sleeping giant. And that's really what happens, is had they not done that, America probably wouldn't have gone to war, probably at some point, but it would have been similar to World War I, but it really becomes the turning point of the war. And if you go there today, you can go and see it, and you can go see the USS Arizona. So let's go into today's stuff, which we have 30 minutes to do, and that's how much time I had yesterday, and we did it. So we're going to do this. Yay, team. Okay, so going into the home front. So you need to know that this was a propaganda war. If you want to put at the top of this entire page, total warfare and mass mobilization. Just like in World War I, the entire country mass mobilizes and goes into total warfare and does whatever is necessary to win the war. Now, what I would know for propaganda is I would maybe highlight Office of Public Information and Office of War Information. Both of those were responsible for publishing all this propaganda. Now, the vast majority of the propaganda, it was a huge poster war. So I'm sure you've all seen the I Want You for the U.S. Army, loose lips might sink ships. That's a really popular one as well. What does that mean, by the way, loose lips might sink ships?
Selling secrets.
Yeah, what if I'm coming home from the war and I'm like, man, that big bombing factory we have in Germany at this location, that's a big one. And you have a German spy next to you, right? This has been parodied a lot of times as well. I also love the fact that it was also, we don't do this a lot today. I think it would be considered too racist today in terms of if we went against our current people. But you can see that like Hitler's killing the Bible right here. You can see making fun of them. Japan, though, is going to be different because it's going to be extremely racially motivated. Why would we hate the Japanese so much more than Germany and Italy? They attacked Pearl Harbor, right? We're going to hate the people who attacked us the most during this. So you'll notice a lot of racism comes out in the propaganda against Germans. Now, actually, we'll talk about that later. Comic books. A lot of people don't know that your U.S. government is who paid for the creation of Captain America. The Office of War Information paid for this creation. So if you notice a lot of these, you can see he's destroying Hitler, he's stopping Nazi bombs, all these different things happening in World War II. Additionally, they would bomb leaflets over areas that they wanted to be able to get to convince people to come over to the American side. Now, selective service, we talked about it before, it's obviously going to be with a draft. So the draft gets released, but unfortunately, the draft is not equal. Now, while a lot of people signed up for the military by themselves, there was a huge inequality in who was being drafted. You need to make sure to know, and I think I say it as controversy, you need to make sure you know that African Americans were heavily drafted as well as impoverished people compared to other classes. And the major reason for that is there was exemptions. So, for example, if you went to college, you could be exempted. So where did everybody go? College. If you got married, you could be exempted. So what did everybody do? Get married. And what are the least likely people to be able to do that? People who are in poverty and African Americans. And so because of that, there was a huge disproportionate amount. A lot of people did also lie about their age. The youngest known World War II that I'm aware of was 12 years old, who snuck into the military by basically faking their birth certificate, because it was very much a 9/11 moment where everybody wanted to help in the war effort. Yes?
How did they not notice that he was 12?
Again, a lot of this doesn't have to do with just the fact of faking it. A lot of it has to do with the fact that we're going to war, it's patriotic, so it's okay. I remember something around the lines of it, but I'm not 100% sure. But I know that there are several political leaders that did lie about their age to enroll in the military and be able to go to war. Now, the wartime production agencies, everything to do with the economy, I would bracket. So anything that looks like it has to do with the economy, whether it be wartime prosperity or anything like that, you can bracket it and you can put next to it, ended the Great Depression and won the war. While you could ask any historian, why did America win the war? In my opinion, the real reason was a massive boom in the economy. While everybody else's economy was collapsing, our economy increased, our prosperity increased, and we had the economic capability to send people to war with weapons and things like that that they needed. So the wartime production overall begins to shift. So you need to know that wartime production shifts to wartime things, just like World War I. So if you get a comparison between World War I and World War II, the movement of wartime production would be a really good one that you could talk about. So let me give you some examples. A lot of factories begin to convert, the most famous of which, pencil factories converted to bomb factories, because the way that they had the mechanisms to make pencils was the perfect way to make the parts of the bomb. So they just converted all those machines to bomb machines. Now, additionally, they also started to create really well and get fine-tuned into what are called Liberty ships. So the average ship before this time of a warship took anywhere between 9 and 12 months to be able to create. Does America have time for that? No way. So they create these Liberty ships. Anybody have any idea how long it took for this ship to be built? 2 weeks?
3 weeks.
3 weeks?
3 days.
3 days? How about 24 hours?
Why?
By the end of the war, they got it down to such a science they could build an entire warship, which you can see right here. Here's another example of what it looks like today. There's only 2 known Liberty ships that still exist. Most of them were scrap metaled after the war. And they didn't have anything. So there was no fancy schmancy nothing. It was like you slept on the floor in a sleeping bag. Okay, they had like a little kitchen, but there's no tables. It was like the bare minimum. Actually, it's kind of interesting because sometimes when they would leave the dock, they would like christen it, and then it would leave, and then it would fall apart in the ocean, like 2 feet away. But they could build this, and it shows that wartime production. Now, yeah.
How effective were the Liberty ships, though?
They were effective enough that they ended up making, I think it was 16,000 of them. So it worked. It did what it needed to do, which is bring supplies and military to the locations that they needed.
Oh, so they weren't like battleships.
No, these aren't battleships. These are, in particular, transport ships and supply ships. So it did its purpose of what it needed to do. But it did have gunneries and stuff like that. Now, rationing is a really good example of the transition of everybody to the war effort. Everything began to get rationed. So you would receive a ration book that has stamps that you could be able to use to be able to get your stuff for the rations. Now, the biggest reason for this is the idea was we can send all of our stuff away to the war effort. Why are you getting an extra piece of steak when that could feed somebody off in the war? And you started to have to change your things to be able to help with the wartime effort. So, for example, if your grandparents ever make something called ration cake, it's very popular. Ration cake has no eggs, no flour, and no sugar, and no butter. because all of those were rationed. And it actually tastes pretty good. I used to make it, but now they're much more strict that teachers can't like provide home-baked food for you. So think in your head what it might taste like. It's made with a lot of things so I would have to go, you can Google like ration cake. Some of them were flourless, some of them were. But a lot of it you would use like bacon fat and things like that, and you would put it into the cake. It only has like 6 ingredients, so it's very, very cheap to be able to make. It's kind of bland, but it's cake. So, but a lot of it is, why would you sit there and celebrate your birthday when soldiers are dying off at war? Does that make sense? So it'd be better to give stuff away. Now let me give you an even better example. Anybody ever had a Twinkie before? They ever had a Twinkie? Okay. By the way, I don't know if you know this, but Twinkies don't expire. They have Twinkies from like the 1960s that are still fluffy. It has something to do with what they put into it. Well, the original Twinkie filling, does anybody know that was not the original Twinkie filling? Anybody know what it was? Pickle? Oh, I was like, oh my gosh, disgusting. So it originally was bananas. So originally had a banana custard filling inside of the Twinkie, but when the war began, bananas were rationed and the trade was cut off. So they created this brand new filling that had no sugar in it, none of the rationed items, and they filled the Twinkies with it and then sold them. And then after the war, they tried to switch back to the bananas, but everybody was so patriotic and stuff like that. They were like, we don't want that un-American bananas and stuff. And people preferred the other one, which is why you have that today. And the benefit of that is Twinkies do not expire, which is when we had the great Twinkie incident of 2 years ago when everybody thought the Twinkie was gone and they started buying Twinkies off eBay for $1,000 a piece. That's why partially is that Twinkies do not expire. They can retain their fluff for, they're saying, probably 100 to 200 years. Because they're using a bunch of stuff that is unexpirable from the war, because it's the same recipe that they used in World War II.
Is it like, that's like, feels like it's unhealthy or like chemicals?
Well, it is a Twinkie. It's very American to eat your Twinkies. Yes.
Are the banana fillings back yet?
They did a limited edition a few years ago for the anniversary of the war. I think it was the 50th anniversary of World War II in 1995. They did it, and nobody bought it. So, but it lasted, so there you go. But anyways, it was not just food. It was anything you could get. Gasoline was rationed. Pantyhose were rationed. Women's undergarments, bras in particular, had to change their entire system so that they could ration things for the war. All of these things changed. Yeah. Because nylon can be used as a rubber material. So what they can do is they can use the nylon for multiple things, including bandages as well. So it wasn't like pantyhose, it was the nylon that creates the pantyhose. Okay? And all people had to change things. So people, for example, the soles of your shoes got cut in half so that you could be able to send rubber and things like that to the war effort. Anything that you could be able to do to help the war. Now, wartime prosperity, really, like I said before, the war expands the U.S. economy. It's a massive, massive help. So all of this is the economic effects that I've already talked about before. I'm not going to go into those a whole ton. But just know, economy booms, the Great Depression ends, everybody is happy. Now, in terms of women in the military service, I would star this. It's been an LEQ individually by itself. You must know that World War II massively changes women, and it really starts the women's rights movements in the 1950s. So overall, women begin to be in many positions. Make sure you know Rosie the Riveter. Rosie the Riveter is not one individual person, although if you saw in the news last week, they were like, Rosie the Riveter died. According to the artist, there has never been an official Rosie the Riveter. There are about 40 people who say they were the original Rosie the Riveter. Whatever. What you need to know is that the Riveters were women in wartime production. Make sure you know women go into wartime production facilities. All the men are gone, women overtake it, and we'll talk about later in the 1950s why women start to push for new rights because of that. Well, not only that, but women can also enroll in the military in non-combat positions. So all of a sudden, women can be in the Army Corps. So this is the Women's Auxiliary Corps. And then also the WASPs, which are the very first women pilots, begin to come forth. Whoops. Women also are able to start to go into the Navy and different things like that. And overall, this is a massive expansion of women's rights. It breaks the cult of domesticity of women being able to be in the war effort. If you can just start to remember, like, WASPs are really easy to remember, or WAVES, and those are a great one that you could be able to throw in on the AP exam if they ask about women in the war. Also, women in the war would be great, for example, rationing programs. Anything to do with home-time war effort would be really good. African Americans is another very, very important one that happens. Now, first off, African Americans get some rights, but as an asterisk, okay? Now, they are going for what is called the double V. And the double V means, why are we fighting these fascists when we have our own problems back at home? Why are we having all of these issues, and yet we go over and we're fighting these dictators? So you can see that they're defeating Jim Crow, but Jim Crow is the same as Nazism in the Japanese. So the double V means victory at home and victory abroad. So again, victory at home and victory abroad. So what that means is if we win the war abroad, then we will have victory over racism at home. And it doesn't work until Vietnam. And then that's when it begins to really get pushed. Also, you need to know that executive order, and it's 9980, there was like 4 of them, I wrote it wrong on here. But basically, you need to know, all you have to do for that, they desegregated the military. Now, you might say, great, African American rights, whoop, whoop. Do you think that was for African American rights? No, it was a wartime strategy to get more people in the U.S. military. Yeah.
Wait, what is it called? Because on paper it says it's executive order 9-0.
Yeah, as long as you just know desegregated the military. There was like a whole bunch of them that desegregated the military. As long as you know that they're desegregated the military. They won't require you to do the executive order. Yes?
If the Great Depression was going on for 2 years before this, how'd they get all the money to like fund the war?
Wartime production. The government has to spend money in deficit spending to buy wartime production, so that creates a guaranteed consumer for the products that you're creating. All right, now let's talk about the Japanese. Now, obviously with the Japanese, again, why did we hate the Japanese so much? They bombed Pearl Harbor, okay? And so because of that, we begin to discriminate against the Japanese here in America. Now, basically this begins by common things. We don't want you here. Please go away. And these are all Japanese Americans for the most part that are 3rd generation Japanese Americans. And what basically happens is they begin to discriminate. You are not allowed to come into my restaurant. You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do that. Well, it ends up resulting in several laws being passed, including not allowing Japanese kids to come to schools or not allowing them to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And especially you begin to see this trend rise and rise and rise as fear begins. Now, these next 2 are probably some of my favorite primary sources of how badly we hated the Japanese. Now, if you notice in both of these, when are they saying the season is declared? When does the hunting season open?
The anniversary of
On Pearl Harbor. Exactly. And so now we're going to get to the Japanese. And I always hear a lot of people say, well, why didn't we hate the Chinese? Because the Chinese were attacked by the Japanese. So while they were both Asian, we like the Chinese better than the Japanese. Well, what ends up happening is basically you need to know the executive order, which I believe is the last one on your page, which creates Japanese internment. So when Japanese internment is created, you are not going to put these people in internment camps to protect America from the Japanese. Now, if you notice, where's the vast majority of all of these centers? Very broad. How about a state? California. Why would it be California? That's where they all are. And remember how we talked about Gold Rush, Chinese Exclusion Act, all that's in California of this competition. We do have one here in Utah, which is Topaz, but Manzanar is probably the most famous. Now, it's very much a military-style place, and you are not allowed to leave. A lot of kids had constant diarrhea, partially because when you got put into this, they didn't consider the diets of the Japanese American. So while a lot of Japanese American kids were reliant on like rice and things like that, they gave them hot dogs and hamburgers. And a lot of kids, it was such a new food for them that they had constant diarrhea. So all these different like intestinal disorders were very common all throughout the camps. Now, there is a way that you could leave the camp, and that was to do one of 2 things. One, you could sign a loyalty oath and enlist in the U.S. military. Problem is, the loyalty oath had several weird questions. Like one of them said, I will not relate to Japanese culture whatsoever. Well, if you're a Japanese American, you still do Japanese type things with your family. So a lot of people put no and were automatically declined. The second one is you can be drafted into the military, and if you survive, your family gets released. But if you die, they stay there. And so it's a really weird environment. Now, a lot of celebrities as well. So this is the guy from Star Trek. He was actually in an internment camp for 3 years. And different things like that. Now, Topaz, unfortunately, most of these camps get dismantled following the war to use a scrap metal. So Topaz, it looks like this today. They did just barely create a brand new museum. And I've never been there, so I don't know how cool it is. But you can go down to Topaz, but it's far away. It's about 3.5 hours away in the middle of nowhere. There's no cell service. But I heard the museum's cool, but I just haven't been there. Now, the Bracero Program is going to be specifically for Mexicans coming in. So basically what happens is that we need farm laborers. All of our farm laborers have been drafted. So we make a labor agreement with Mexico to allow Mexican laborers to temporarily come in on a visa into America and work on the farms. And there was a guaranteed wage, living conditions, and things like that. But there's a problem. First off, they didn't get exactly what they expected. A lot of the owners of the farms were very harsh and very mean and also did not protect them. But then number two, after the war, everybody overstayed their visas. What does that lead to the creation of here in America? If people overstay their visas, what does that mean that they are in America? Illegal immigrants. If you want to put next to this begins illegal immigration into the United States from Mexico. And it had a really cool map, but apparently they took it away. So I can't show you a cool map, but imagine a map that shows how much Mexican immigration is in America in the 1960s. But the Zoot Suit riots is a great example of what happens when you mass mobilize so much to the point that you are willing to hurt people for breaking that. So Zoot Suits were from Latinos, especially in California, and it was these really big, over-the-top suits that had a ton of fabric. It was very bulky, it was very long, it was very big. And a lot of Latinos would wear this as like a symbol of Latinos. Well, there's a problem. What does it also mean in terms of rationing? It's a lot of materials. So what do they start to call these Zoot suits? Un-American. So these are the un-American, these are the anti-American, and we don't like that. To the point where they literally go and kill people over these Zoot suits. So what happens is U.S. naval men in San Diego start to say that this is so un-American. They begin to beat people up. So what you're seeing here, this guy got beaten up so badly, he became paralyzed from the neck down. This guy was stripped naked from wearing that Zoot suit. The police officers were all told, oh no, the guys pushed first, and the Zoot suit people were arrested. Now, it took almost 30 years for them to apologize for what happened in San Diego and LA. But overall, I think it was like 30 people died and over 500 Latinos were injured from the Zoot Suit riots. Now, in terms of freedom and democracy and overall, make sure you know America fought for freedom and democracy. Basically, the ability to be able to stop all these different things. So, for example, you had like all these wartime atrocities and different problems and things like that were going on. Wartime strategies and all. So all those different ones I gave you, the only one that you might not know is the Bataan Death March that they might talk about, which is basically where Japan had overtaken the Philippines and they forced people to march in the Philippines and ended up resulting in thousands of deaths. Basically, you just need to know America fought for these things to end. Now, in terms of overall wartime strategies, there are two major wartime strategies that you might see on the AP exam. D-Day is the turning point in Europe. So with D-Day, you're going to have the invasion of multiple different beaches. It becomes the turning point. Just know that if you see anything about D-Day, that's the turning point of the war. Island hopping is the strategy in the Pacific. So make sure you know that island hopping is the strategy in the Pacific. Because there's so many islands in the Pacific, their goal is we're going to hop island to island to island to island to island until eventually we hit Japan. So those are the two major strategies. They're the only ones referenced in the key concepts. So we can assume that that's more than likely what they're going to ask on the AP exam, island hopping in particular. Although I see a lot of D-Day sources, but they basically just say, what does D-Day represent? Good wartime strategy. And then you'll be good to go. Now, let's talk about one of my favorite topics, which is always going to be the atom bomb. Now, the atom bomb is created by a guy named J. Robert Oppenheimer. J. Robert Oppenheimer is going to create the atom bomb in what's called the Manhattan Project. So if you will highlight and star the Manhattan Project. And the Manhattan Project was a secret, undercover thing where basically they were going to create this project. Now, Albert Einstein assisted in the creation of the atomic bomb, but he said it was one of the worst decisions he had ever made. The reason why is he had been told they were going to use the atom bomb on Germany. He had been a former refugee, so he actually escaped as a Jewish German in the late 1930s, and he believed that they were going to drop it on Germany. We never had any intention on dropping it on Germany. We knew we were going for Japan. Now, the Trinity test is going to be the test in Los Alamos, New Mexico, that is going to test this thing. Now, they didn't know what was going to happen. They were hoping for the best. They did want to test how many people would die, though, so they bought about 500 cows from farmers, but said you can just keep them at your own place. Well, all of these places were 50 miles, 100 miles, 200 miles from Los Alamos. And then they were told they were going to study them, so you can keep the cows, and then once the study is over, you can sell the cows and have it for your meat. So the farmers are like, yeah, I get free stuff. Those cows died, and they couldn't figure out why. We know why. It's because of the Trinity test. So the Trinity test, though, becomes this bomb that when it ends up going off, it really shows all of the different problems that were happening in this wartime effort. So when we talk about the Trinity test, so this video, oops, wrong one, this video. So we're going to watch this Trinity test video. So this one is from a little bit farther. I want to get to the better one. So this one is from 1 mile away. Well, here's the thing, though. They didn't know about fallout. They didn't know about radiation.
People come watch.
Well, let me show. Oh, hold on. Like, you mean these people?
Yeah.
That's on the detonation site about 1 hour after it detonated. Now, they didn't know that there was fallout. So in their defense, they did not know about radiation and things like that. Now, the crater looks like this. So this is the crater that it ends up creating from Trinity. And basically what happens is they're like, okay, now we have a bomb. J. Robert Oppenheimer is very famous that he said when we looked at this after it had gone, some people laughed, some people cried, some people didn't know what to say, but we knew we had now become death, the destroyer of worlds. And because he knew that he created a bomb that has changed everything. Yes?
My grandpa, well, not grandpa, he's dead. My step-grandpa was a downwinder during the Cold War bomb testing. Like, they would test a bunch of bombs in Nevada, and he was a downwinder.
That sounds really cool. That would be really cool to learn about and things like that.
Well, now he has cancer.
Well, fun fact, not so fun. Out of this picture, these are all the heads of the people that ended up doing this. Everybody but one died of cancer in 10 years.
Ouch.
Because they didn't know radiation. But hey, they had their booties. So they were going to be just fine. Okay? Now, in terms of overall, another way that you can tell that this ends up coming has to do with Kodak. So in the olden days, there was a thing called film cameras. And film could be ruined by radiation. So all these people, a couple months after the Trinity test, which nobody knew the Trinity test had happened, they ended up going to get their film processed, and it looked like this. And Kodak got all these complaints, and they had to refund all these people. And they're like, why is there such a weird congregation in the Southwest of people whose film was destroyed? And it's because of the radiation. They think that the radiation probably went several thousand, probably 5,000 miles away was the closest one. They were getting readings on the East Coast from the radiation from Trinity. Well, Truman became the president, but here's the interesting thing. He had no idea that the bomb existed. So he actually, I took it out on accident. Oh, there it is. So what happened is he receives a letter his very first day as the president after FDR dies. And this is in about May, I think it is, May or April of the same year of the atomic bombs. And it basically says, I have something to talk to you about. Can you come meet with me right away? And that's when he found out that we had this entire atomic bomb. He had no idea. The vice president role changes after Truman because it turns out you need to know a bunch of stuff like the atomic bomb. So what ends up happening is he drops the atom bomb. Now you need to know his justification. He justifies this because he says the dropping of the bomb stopped the war, saved millions of lives. You need to know that they dropped the atomic bombs because, one, it would bring Russia into the war if Japan did not surrender, and two, is that it would save millions of lives. At the Potsdam Conference, which if you will highlight Potsdam Conference, at the Potsdam Conference, they gave Japan an ultimatum. This was about 2 weeks before the bomb. You either, A, go ahead and surrender, or B, all of you will die. Japan did not surrender. The USSR committed that once we dropped the atomic bombs, if Japan did not surrender, they would declare war on Japan, which they had not so far. And we dropped the atomic bombs. Now, the atomic bombs, when they were dropped, this is by Enola Gay, that's who dropped the bombs. There was Fat Boy and Little Man. One thing about this, they did train out at Tooele. So Tooele is where they trained for all of this of dropping the bombs. Only one person knew the atom bombs. They had no idea until these were loaded onto their planes of what they were dropping on the people. Now, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are going to be the two locations where these bombs are dropped. Easiest way to remember which order they are in, it's alphabetical. So Hiroshima goes first, Nagasaki goes second. Yes? Hiroshima ends up, well, it's hard to be able to figure out. So Hiroshima kills less people compared to Nagasaki. However, Hiroshima has a more long-term impact of radiation poisoning because it was a higher populated area. Now, overall, it gets completely destroyed. The entire city is under complete fire. Overall, in the end, radiation was really bad. So if you didn't die from the initial shock, you would also die possibly from your skin literally melting. Your clothing and stuff like that got burnt onto you, and they would try to tear it off, and you would die of shock. Just warning you, there's some worse pictures coming up, just to let you know. The radiation was so bad that people got permanent deformities. People started having kids after this, and they would have kids with no head, kids with an arm where a leg is supposed to be because of the malformalities. Overall, massive amounts of death. At least 400,000 people approximately died within these two bombs. That does not include the millions more who died of radiation and things like that. Probably the most lasting images has to do with what's called the shadows. The light is so bright and the heat is so great that it basically takes the water molecules and it makes a permanent shadow on buildings. So it basically creates a permanent remembrance of this bomb going off. Unfortunately, this also includes people. And it includes the permanent shadows of people who had died from these bombings. Now, in the end, this is what it looks like, before and after, before and after. Japan then surrenders, and the war is now over. And that is the end of World War II. So, here's what you need to know. We have a test next class. You have a study guide, and you have a quiz. The quiz is going to be due next class period before. It's a great practice. I'll also put up an AP Classroom up online as well. Yes?
Didn't Russia declare war on Japan before or after?
Yeah, they drop.